It's July 2023 and I have travelled to very sunny today York in the northeast of the UK to meet Karma AV, whose premises you can partly see there behind me. And Karma AV are the UK distributor for many interesting hi-fi and home theatre brands such as Perlisten Ascendo Audio, In Acoustic, Primare SVS, System Audio and many more. And the reason why I'm here is because of my passion for home theatre. I'm always interested to hear and experience cutting-edge, pinnacle home theatre systems, and Karma AV have 3 excellent demonstration rooms with systems and demonstrations ranging from very real world up to very aspirational, something for everybody. But I'm here to learn about home theatre, especially custom installation home theatre, and to learn about brands like Perlisten and Ascendo Audio and what might be the differences in their approaches to home theatre and maybe big, very big speakers and subwoofers. So I will be interviewing Perlisten, I will be interviewing Ascendo Audio and Primare. So this video is going to be packed with my experiences of all the systems, plus information from the manufacturers themselves. This is going to be a killer video and I really hope you enjoy it. So I'm here with Lars from Perlisten Audio. And Lars, I just want to say thank you very much for flying over to come and see us, to come on camera and obviously make this video, so thank you. Perlisten's a really interesting brand for me because it's a company that I don't know that much about, but I know that they've made a really big splash in a very short period of time. In a sense, a lot of positivity and a lot of people have said lots of great things. But I just want to start by asking you a little bit about the differences between kind of what we have here in a sense of everything being in-wall, and yet the speakers that you also manufacture, like traditional kind of box cabinet type speakers. So is there a difference? Is there an advantage to one over the other?
I think first of all, I just want to say a couple of things. Yes, Perlisten is a very new brand. We came to market only 3 years ago. The foundation of Perlisten is definitely engineering. We came to market with the S series and R series, approximately 30 products at one time. A range of subwoofers on top of that. We are using same component, same driver material, same tweeter material, and the DPC array, which is part of all our speakers, are included in both the box speakers as well as our in-wall speakers. So everything is designed to be temper matched across the line. It's a little bit like a Lego system. You can build it as you want it. Of course, we would recommend that if you're working in the R series, let's call it performance price range, that you stay within that category for the temper matching, voice matching. There's a physical size difference, right? There's a little bit less volume in the speaker, which means that the lower end is probably slightly less. I would say below 40 Hertz, that's not that much, versus a box speaker. But anybody who designs a very good home theater will use multiple subs, right? So that's not an issue for this. Part of the acoustic DNA of Perlisten is the DPC array. This is the S4i in-wall speaker, and you have a beryllium dome in the middle, flanked by 2 mid-ranges. So we have 2 ultra-low mass mid-ranges here using the same Textream fiber, carbon fiber cone, and we use that in the mid-ranges here. So the mid-ranges are flanking the beryllium dome. What we offer here is extremely controlled directivity, whether it's horizontal or whether it's vertical. So we can control the audio longer into the room based on conventional speakers, eliminating all the unwanted reflections from ceilings and walls, giving a much better and much easier way to do the final acoustic control of the room. So you can say it's less stressful what room treatment you actually need because we have better control of this. It also offers, if you look at it, the weight, you can say that, is less than 0.5 gram. So it's very efficient, it's high SPL, it's very low distortion. Again, compared to a conventional 4-inch, 5-inch, mid-range, heavy, right? So this is actually a very interesting concept, and it's part of all our speakers. I just want to repeat that.
Well, why you've got that on your lap, actually, it's probably heavy, but sorry about this. Why you've got that on your lap? Because we've got the R series here, and that's the S series. One of my questions was going to be, they kind of look similar but different, right? Yeah. So what could be, or what are the differences between S and R, and I suppose who are they aimed at customer-wise?
I mean, I think basically it's the same audience, right? It's a little bit like in the car industry. You have a Mercedes S-Class and you have a C-Class, right? It's a lot of the same, but it's different price points. So one of the things is that the R series is half price of the S series. We have the Techstream carbon fiber cone material versus a paper cone with wool and cotton fibers, bamboo actually. This is a 7-inch, this is a 6.5-inch. We're using the beryllium dome here. In the R series we have the silk dome. We have a silk dome mid-range. We have a little bit slightly different cabinet in the R series versus the S series. It's a 25 millimeter HDF board versus a 30 millimeter. The front baffle here is a 50 millimeter versus a 70 millimeter. So there are a lot of difference, and that is the compromise in order to reach the price point. But the acoustic signature is very, very similar, S versus the R series. So S series has, the razor sharp details, the imaging, high SPL, very low distortion. And then if you move down to I would like to say it's more relaxed. It's a little bit more smooth, maybe more appealing to the wider audience, where an S series is probably more the demanding audiophile approach. So that's the two main differences between the two speaker ranges.
You can't be in a home theatre environment and not talk about subwoofers, because I've looked through the range of Perlisten subwoofers, and it's interesting because you've got some that look familiar to me, like a single 12 or a single 15, and yet you've got some much bigger ones with dual 10s, dual 12s, dual 15s, but they seem like they're a push-pull design rather than dual opposed. So why go push-pull rather than dual opposed?
Again, I think I will jump a little bit back again. When we came to the market, and the first question, was, why on earth another speaker brand? And we needed some answers, right? And I think I mentioned that we came with a full range. We came with a lot of speakers. We came with subwoofers. With the S series, we set a standard. And our goal with the subwoofers was exactly the same. I mean, if we wanted to be respected, both as a 2-channel, 2.1, 2.2 audio system, as well as the home theater specialist, we needed good subwoofers. The push-pull technology for us is the answer. The team, Dan, Eric, the two engineers, myself, has worked with push-pull designs for decades. So we think we know how to make it. And there are some advantages to push-pull. Speed and low distortion. The two drivers, one operating outside the cabinet, one operating inside, reversed. So one in phase, one out of phase. It's the answer to low distortion. So you get really, really low distortion. It's not a trick. It's the air which controls the speed of the driver. So when you get an attack, it's there. And when the thunder slowly fade out, the subwoofer slowly fade out. Or if it's an instant stop, the driver stops instantly. So it's a quick one. With the Perlisten designed amplifier, in this case here, it's the R series. It's a 1200 watts, our own CPU built into it, which is kind of like a little doctor. It measures everything what's happening inside the driver. the heat, the distortion, clipping in the amplifier, and it measures that around 1,000 times per second. I think what we are seeing right now around the world is that a lot of people come to us to upgrade. They have an existing system, and one of the first things which we actually recommend is look at the subwoofers. How many do you have in the system? Can you put multiple subs in the system? So go for those 2 or 4 subwoofers into the room. Use that as the first step, and then look at the front system, center channel, left and right, and then start to build your premium THX Domino system. In terms of, let's call it, solution and how to design a good home theater, we can also recommend that, or we work with something called the Cinema Designer. It's a CEDIA-based organization. We are working with them, and we are submitting all our products in terms of CAD drawings. So an architect, a dealer, CI dealer, or even an end user, if they want to try to model, again, I said Lego earlier, if you actually want to try to create your own home theater and see how it visualizes, we can recommend to use the Cinema Designer.
Thank you so much for coming on camera and flying over for all this. So it's, hope everybody enjoys the advice. So thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm here with Jeffrey from Ascendo Immersive Audio. And Jeffrey, can I just say thank you very much for flying over to see me and to come to this event so we can come on camera. I really appreciate it. Thank you. So it's interesting because I know very little about Ascendo Audio. My understanding, it's a German manufacturer. I know that you make very big subwoofers. I mean, you can't really miss the very big subwoofer, but this is not even a big one for what you make. So this is a 24-inch subwoofer.
This is our smallest infrasonic subwoofer. We have 4 models. This is the 24-inch, that's correct. Then we have the 32-inch, which is installed in this room here, 2 pieces. And then we have the 50 and also the 80-inch subwoofer, yes, correct.
So I obviously want to talk to you about that, but I also want to talk to you about your speakers because there's a lot of interesting technology and design gone into them, which is not obvious. So I definitely want to talk about that. When somebody's putting together a home theatre system, they have a budget and they have to divide that budget between subwoofers and speakers. And I think a lot of the time people put a large percentage of the budget into speakers, but I don't always know if that's correct. So what's your advice? What should be the split or the divide of a budget?
Well, if we're talking specifically about home theater, what impresses you most about a home theater is bass. And bass, in my opinion, is 80% or more of the performance and the impression you have emotionally in a home theater. So I would spend the most money, of course, on the bass. Yeah, because with all the other loudspeakers, it's easy to achieve a fairly good sound and SPL level with lower budget, if you choose your products wisely. But with subwoofers, you need a lot of power, you need a lot of cone area to really move a lot of air to get the performance.
So you mentioned 24-inch, 32, 50 and 80. Yeah. So they're enormous subwoofers. So somebody might look at that and think, that's just crazy. So why have a big subwoofer like a 50 or an 80 or even a 24? What is the advantage of that?
Well, the advantage is quite simple because when you really want to reach low, and we call them, of course, infrasonic for a reason, because infrasonic means below 20 hertz, right? And so when you want to reproduce frequencies below 20 hertz in a room, mostly what you do is you pressurize the room, because when you think about it, when you hear low bass in a car or even in your, in your in-ear headphones, right? How do you produce low bass? Because there is no way of, let's say, the wavelength expanding in a room below that for this low frequency. So, but it's possible through pressurization. So you pressurize your ear channel, you pressurize the room, you pressurize a car. And so by pressurizing this environment, you can reproduce very low frequencies. And that's exactly what we do in what we call small room acoustics. We pressurize the room. So you need to move a lot of air. And so how do you move a lot of air? With a lot of cone area and a lot of stroke, right? So the more cone area, the more stroke you have, the more air you move. But it's not only about moving the sheer amount of air, it's also how fast, how precise, how quick you can move this sheer amount of air. A lot of people say, oh, I can do that with a bunch of 15-inch or 18-inch or 21-inch subwoofers. Yes, of course you can. The question is just, when you look at a speaker design from a designer's perspective, when you put then, let's say, an 18-inch in a 2 cubic feet or a 3 cubic feet or even 5 cubic feet enclosure, the system resonance frequency and the system Q is very high, because that's the nature of all these drivers. And the design basically with a sealed enclosure, that's also what we offer. We offer sealed enclosure subwoofers. And when you now put the same driver in a much larger enclosure, like, for example, this enclosure, or even the enclosure of our 32 or 50-inch, you reach, of course, much lower, because the enclosure already with the driver has combined a much lower resonance frequency and also a much lower Q, So it's less boomy, and it's, of course, reaching lower easier in a way. And the driver size is not really that critical. It's really the enclosure size that offers you higher sensitivity and, of course, lower resonance frequency. And so, it's quite clear then when you, let's say, have 12 or even 20 18-inch subwoofers, yeah, you can maybe move a lot of air, maybe similar to our 32-inch subwoofer at maximum power. But you occupy a lot more space. And not only that, you need a lot more amplification power, because each 18-inch subwoofer, to reach to its excursion limit in a sealed enclosure, needs to be driven fairly hard, let's say 2 to 3 kilowatts. So let's say 20 times 3 kilowatts is 60 kilowatts to drive the equivalent of 18-inch subwoofers to a single 32, which is driven by a 6 or 10 kilowatt in our case, right? So you see, basically there is a mismatch here. Yes, of course you can do this with smaller drivers, but you spend a lot more power, a lot more occupied space in your room compared to a larger driver that can move a lot more air in a single stroke, and it occupies a lot less space, but it still acts as the same air pump, basically pumping the air and pressurizing the room in the infrasonic frequencies.
Yeah, because this is what I found really fascinating talking to you about this, and stuff we spoke about off camera. It's like, are they making giant subwoofers just to be the largest subwoofers in the world? And for that, that's what I know now. That it's for fundamental, technical, specific reasons to achieve a certain level of performance as part of a full system. And that leads me lovely on to talking about speakers, because that same kind of mindset you've put into your speakers, but kind of the other way around, in a sense of making them more of a satellite subs type system. Mostly all coaxial based designs, which is where the tweeter sits in the middle of the driver. Mm-hmm. First question is, why the coaxial design?
We just talked about a tweeter and a mid-range. Try to combine a tweeter and a mid-range, and it can be a horn, a waveguide, a mid-range, driver, whatever. When you place basically now a tweeter like this and a mid-range like that, there is a physical distance, right? And this physical distance, at the same frequency, let's say the crossover frequency, most of the times the tweeters and the woofers or the mid-woofers are crossed over at what? Like lowest 1.5, but average maybe 2.5, 3 kilohertz, right? Now, when we look at the wavelength at these frequencies, and when we look at now specifically home theater, because we are a company designing only for home theater with Ascendo Immersive Audio, right? The big problem is we don't have a 2-channel environment here. We have multiple seats in here. We have 10 seats, for example, in this room. To really have all the 10 seats have an even coverage from the loudspeaker should not show any measured anomalies horizontally or vertically off-axis. The off-axis response is the most important, not the on-axis response. Looking at typical two-way loudspeaker designs, they mostly employ a separate tweeter and a separate mid-range. Now, this physical distance, when you, for example, draw circles or pull a string towards your ear, now when I move down or up, these strings basically change in length, right? What does this change in length do? It changes basically the phase behavior between the tweeter and the woofer. And by changing the phase behavior, depending on, of course, the frequency, there is more or less phase change. So that means there is more or less cancellation happening, right? And cancellation, what does cancellation do? It creates a dip in your frequency response. So especially in the very sensitive area of voice, you know, where the tweeter and the mid-range mostly is crossed over between, let's say, 1.5 and 3 kilohertz, you create a dip. Are you serious? That's exactly one of the reasons why we employ coaxial, because in a coaxial, in a point source coaxial actually, the tweeter is in the center of the mid-woofer, and so no matter where you basically measure now on or off axis, you always have the same impulse and frequency response. And we design our loudspeaker for an even sound power. You want the speaker to radiate the same energy in every direction. Why? Because the human brain perceives space in a room and spaciousness in a room through the reflections. So the reflections are even more important than the direct sound you hear from a loudspeaker, because through that your brain can make some basically calculates how big the space is, how the space is shaped, you know, what kind of material is the wall or the floor, all that kind of stuff. These reflections our brain of course naturally process, and only when the off-axis response, frequency response and impulse response is the same as on-axis, our brain can relax. And also, when you look at object-based processor today from modern movies in Dolby Atmos and DTS:X, then that's exactly how it works, because let's say you have 32 speakers in a room, and these 32 speakers, each pair of these 32 speakers is and create a virtual phantom sound source, right? And so that's exactly when sound moves through a room with these objects, there is multiple pairs of speakers basically creating this phantom image. And the more precise this loudspeaker reproduces impulse, because human brain perceives only or mainly impulse. Frequency response is not really important for our brain to perceive location, but location is only the impulse important. So when you have, let's say, two impulses from a tweeter, from a mid-range, or even from a tweeter mid-range woofer arriving at different times, our brain gets completely confused and it's not at ease, and that basically creates a lot of listening fatigue. So our speaker have a lot less, or if none, listening fatigue. You know, you can listen to them for hours, and because of, you know, high efficiency and all that, you can also listen to them at very high volume levels without fatiguing, you know.
This feels very suitable to very big systems, very complex systems. And that's really interesting. But what I was thinking is that in terms of what you guys manufacture, it's not only for that big, huge, very expensive market at all, is it? So
if you look at this speaker here, for example, this is our D6 passive, and that's a 6.5 inch point source coaxial. I don't know if you can see that, but in here there is a soft dome 1 inch tweeter, and this speaker is only 3 inches deep, right? It has different mounting options. You can, you know, hang it horizontally, vertically. We have here a Visa 100 mounting holes, so you can use a Visa mount. We have also here 4 holes. I don't know if you can see that. These are through holes, so you can screw the speaker directly through these holes to the ceiling or onto the wall. And here is the connector. It's a custom made connector for us with Phoenix connectors. where you can basically pull the wire out here and so completely flush the speaker against the wall. But also we have a flush mount kit for this speaker, which then this speaker becomes an in-wall speaker, right? So extremely versatile. And then we have this speaker also as a 30-degree wedge version and also as a narrow version. So basically, literally the driver is the width of the speaker and it's just longer. So we have 3 models which employ the same driver, yeah, and all have the same performance. So this driver has 93 dB 1 watt. So that means it's an 8 ohm driver, 2.83 volts supplied to the driver, and it gives a sensitivity of 93 dB, has a power handling of 250 watt RMS, and does well over 120 dB peak, 116 dB continuous. This is physically almost impossible to build this driver. I mean, this is the best you can find in the market. It's the most compact. It outperforms sometimes 5-6 times the size speakers. It has, as you mentioned before, a limited frequency response down to about 80 Hertz. But again, since the processor manages in bass management the diversion basically of the bass to the subwoofer, it doesn't need to play lower than 80 Hertz. That covers basically the other end of the spectrum. You know, we are known for very big, very expensive things, but this is an inexpensive speaker with a very high performance, with a very high-end sound quality. You can even use this speaker for high-end reproduction with a couple of subwoofer or a single subwoofer, even in a 2.1 or 2.2 system, which is not expensive at all. I mean, we're talking maybe 3,000-4,000 quid here, you know.
Yeah.
You know.
I want to bring that back a little bit, just Jeffrey, because we spoke a lot about technical things in this interview, like big systems, big subwoofers, big power. But you mentioned sound quality. We haven't mentioned sound quality at all, right?
Well,
so how do you define the Ascendo sound?
Our heritage, basically, from the high end, we introduced into these home theater loudspeakers, but also we introduced sensitivity, efficiency, power handling. So that means high dynamics. Because if you think about one thing, a movie from a very quiet to a very loud noise can sometimes have a dynamic range of over 70 or 80 dB. That's a lot. If we're talking about that, I don't know, I didn't make the equation right now, but we're talking literally 1,000,000 times more watt or power basically than you know, the softest, you know, passages, you know. And in 2-channel, most of the modern productions, they have a dynamic range of 3 dB. That's nothing, that's double the power, right? And even high-end recordings, you know, from, let's say, the 60s or 70s, if you look at the, you know, living stereo recordings or whatever is there out there, or Sheffield recordings and, you know, all the famous stuff, basically. I mean, they have a dynamic range of merely 20 to 25 decibels. And those are extremely good, extremely high dynamic recordings, you know. And so if you look at that, it's a lot more challenging to do home theater speakers because you need to have a speaker that has a lot higher linearity. Otherwise, it would sound bad, right? Otherwise, you know, when you have very small and low passages, you know, where, you know, you have a whisper, literally, you know, it's very difficult to have the intelligibility, right? And in the entire dynamic range. And then even when it's very, very loud, when you have a lot of action, you know, to still hear basically the voice. So the clarity is very important. So all these factors, you know, are very different in home theater. We bring some of the experience we have today from home theater now back to stereo also, you know, and basically introduce speakers that have higher dynamic range and capability than typical hi-fi speakers, you know, and that makes basically also the 2-channel world better.
Yeah, it's been a long conversation, Jeffrey. Thank you very much for flying over and thanks for coming on camera. I've learned so much. I could talk to you all day, but we just haven't got the time. But thank you so much. Thank you. So I'm here with Terry from Primare, and Terry, it's one of those things when you walk into a very high-end big home cinema like this, you see all the seats, you see the giant screen, you listen to the big speakers and the even bigger subwoofers, laser projector with this amazing image. But it's easy to forget about the importance of the amplifiers, which are at the back of the room, obviously in a rack in this instance, which is why I wanted to talk to you kind of at the back of the room with this unusual camera angle, so hopefully we could see the racks behind us. So my question would be, what is Primare's role in an amazing home cinema like this, and how important is the role of the amplifier?
As you might imagine, the role of the amplifier is critical and as important as all of those other aspects that you mentioned. But in particular, a system of this level of sophistication in a room this size, you need a considerable amount of power. And in a room like this, there are all kinds of configurations to those speakers, the number of speakers, how they're amplified. And so all of that has to be considered. And so when we were designing our home cinema amplifiers, or our amplifier range, we made sure that we had the flexibility so that they could be configured in ways that accommodated virtually any configuration while delivering the immense amount of power that is needed. And as you are well aware, the dynamics in a home cinema are far greater than music. And we're not talking about necessarily just the effects, those large-scale explosions, but those effects also include the smallest, tiniest little detail that's absolutely important. The sound of that match strike before you light the fuse of the dynamite and before it explodes. And so you need that range within that power delivery. So you need delicacy and power. But then you also need to make sure that you have the reserves so that you have not only this instantaneous power, but can sustain it. And so in the case of our, say, A35.2 stereo amplifier, it can obviously be used in a stereo configuration for a couple hundred watts per channel, but then you can bridge it. And once you bridge it, you have a mono amplifier of 500 watts. And then you can imagine all the different applications for that, a mono amplifier for your left, center, and right speakers. But then we also designed the A35.8, our multi-channel amplifier. And a lot of people always have this immediate question of why 8 channels? Why not an odd number of channels? And we realized that with the same bridging technique, we could offer every possible combination that we needed. So even if the A35.8 is on its own, we could bridge, say, the 3 pairs of those channels to create left, center, right, mono signals going up from 150 watts to 375 watts for each of those channels, and still have 150 watts per channel for each of the rear speakers in a 5.1 system. And you can imagine the combinations that go on from there. And in fact, the ultimate kind of combination is where you can bridge all 4 of those pairs, and then you have, if you have, say, a bi-wireable or bi-amplable speaker, you literally have 375 watts going out of each of those channels, which means each speaker gets 750 watts, and for a total of 1,500 watts of amplification power. Now, the power isn't that immense amount of power isn't always the absolute factor, the only factor to consider, because you need to be able then to differentiate in a very subtle way all of those characteristics that are part of what the processor is feeding those amplifiers. So whether it is the various timbres of a voice, because obviously a movie soundtrack is composed of 3 different things: the effects channel we've already talked about, the human voice, which our hearing is most tuned to detect all of the subtle differences. I mean, over a cell phone, you know who's talking over a poorly articulated cell phone, and then of course you've got music itself. And so to be able to maybe tease out all of those threads in that fabric of the soundtrack is absolutely vital and absolutely important. And that's where then the kind of setup that you do is absolutely critical to make sure that all of those details then are in balance, in proportion, arriving at the ear at just the right time.
When we're talking about a giant home cinema like this, it's easy to forget kind of normal people, real world people, right? Which is where the middle room here really speaks to me, because it's more similar to what I might be able to have in my life. But in that middle system is Primare equipment as well, including the new SPA25 AV receiver. So can you maybe tell us about the SPA25?
Our stated goal is to provide the best possible experience for the greatest number of people. And so the SPA25 is really designed, as you suggest, for everyone's living room. Any space that they might have, be it a den, family room, whatever it might be, that should be able to slip in and provide all of that dynamic power we've been talking about with this massive rack of amplifiers for those situations and do it effectively. And one of the things we built into that, which is similar to that configurability that we were discussing with the basic amplifiers, is the idea that we have an adaptive power supply. And what that means is that as the demand of the various channels within any moment in the cinema, the amplifier is able to deliver power as needed up to a certain point. But it means that, say, if there's not much going on in your height speakers or your rears, but a lot is happening in the front channel, more power can be delivered to those speakers to be able to then effortlessly reveal that moment in the film. And then likewise, we also have built in the ability to bi-amplify your front, left, and right speakers. Again, with that idea that we want to make sure, or one of the features that we believe are important in a home cinema, is that you're able to listen to anything you want as effectively as you want. And so whether that's movies or music. And so in the case of this bi-amplification configuration, most of us have larger left and right speakers, and this allows for the power to get the most out of those speakers if, of course, they're bi-wirable or bi-ampable. And so with that in mind, we made sure then that we're able to deliver the power in a configuration that made sense. So 9 channels of amplification with 11 channels of processing, so that you can add, say, one of our A35.2s for the fullest expression of that compact but still very powerful system.
And one last thing to talk to you about, Terry, is the decision to use Direct Live within the new SPA25, which, regulars to the channel know I'm very passionate about. Why choose Direct for your new SPA25?
And so the beautiful thing about Dirac then is that it can come in very, as you well know, very precisely, almost with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, go in and work with not only tonal balance, but phase and timing issues that can be resolved for that greater clarity, to provide us a greater definition for be able to tell that cinematic story better. And the particular example that I like to use is, again, that center channel, tucked in underneath a display. It is not the ideal position for that speaker. And yet, with Dirac, you can make that center image launch up onto the video image so that it's absolutely convincing and in line with your left and right speakers in a way that is simply not possible in any other manner. And so in many ways, it allows people then to overcome the limitations of their room, where they can put their speakers. Sometimes those are even aesthetic considerations where they're able to put the speakers to accommodate the living room environment where the family will be entertaining. And so with that, it provides that kind of last little element to lock in our ability to tune a system to get the most from all the power that we're delivering, the processing capabilities, and let alone then tying it to beautiful image.
I couldn't have said any of that better myself, Terry. It's exactly what my experiences of it for a number of years. It's fantastic to hear that, but also fantastic to spend time with yourself. Thank you for flying here to come on camera and to see this and to meet me. It's absolutely fantastic, so thank you. So I'm sitting in one of the seats. There's 10 seats actually in the main big demonstration room, big cinema here at Karma AV. And the reason why I'm here is obviously to experience different home theatre systems and learn about home theatre systems. So on that, it makes sense to explain I suppose the 3 different listening rooms that are here. There's one that is, as I mentioned in the introduction, very real world in terms of its size. I think very living room-esque in terms of its design. So there's a system audio home theatre system in there. And there's also an SVS based small speaker package home theatre 7.1.4 I think system in there too. So these are very compact, very real world systems that are, easier for people to just make work in their living room, general home living room environments. But they're still systems that, pack real punch, and deliver real, home theatre experiences. And then interestingly, when you step up into the middle room here, which is kind of the real shocker, I think, in terms of the performance you get in there. So in that room, there is an in-wall Perlisten system and an in-wall Ascendo system. And then, of course, you can come in this huge cinema, which is almost commercial sized really when I think about it, with a 5-meter screen, which difficult to comprehend how big that screen is. There's the JVC NZ9, I think it is, the laser projector, JVC's top of the range projector, which easily fills a 5-meter screen with light. So to talk about my experiences of the different systems that I hear, and it's difficult to maybe talk about one thing over another thing without making one seem better than the other or one bad or worse. There's no bad system here. They're all excellent systems. But of course, they're kind of catering to different people, maybe catering to different tastes in terms of sound or just capability in terms of size of room, because that really does make a difference. Obviously, the bigger the room gets, the more difficult it's going to be to give you that same visceral, immediate, intimate experience. In a smaller room, it's much easier, of course, to give you that immediate intimate experience because you're much closer to the speakers. Therefore, the energy that comes out of those speakers is going to hit you with more intensity because power drops off really quite quickly over distance. So when you're in a giant room like we're in at the moment, of course, you need a very, very big, very, very capable system. So this big room here is like the ultimate test, really, of how good a home theatre system can be and how good it is. But let's start with the smaller room. Obviously, I haven't done a huge amount of listening in the smaller room, but it's surprising, really, when you've listened to giant rooms like this, when you go and listen to real world systems like I have, very real world systems, they don't disappoint you. They still impress you with the experience they deliver, the clarity, the amount of bass impact that you can get just from very small subwoofers, and the immersion of sound, of course. Smaller systems do that fantastic, and in a way I think smaller systems maybe do that a little bit better because small speakers can disappear sometimes a little better than bigger speakers. But I didn't spend a huge amount of time in the small room. In the medium-sized room, that's the big kicker room for impression, because when you've been in the giant room like I'm sitting in now, when you go in the smaller room, you kind of expect there to be a big step down in performance, but there really isn't. And I think that's testament to the quality of the gear that's in there. So Perlisten R-series speakers and their subwoofers and the Ascendo system. Yeah, it's a smaller Ascendo system, but it's kind of got the same characteristics as a bigger Ascendo system. And that's really, I think, really interesting to someone like me, because I could never have this giant system, but maybe I could have those types of systems in that middle room. So interesting for me in the middle room is, from both the Perlisten system and the Ascendo system, is the dynamics. They're really lively sounding systems, really energetic. They really put you at the heart of the movie or the music experience. And then the bass that those subwoofers, the Perlisten, dual Perlistens or the dual Ascendo subwoofers can deliver is enormous, actually, very visceral. So how would I describe the differences between maybe the Perlisten system and the Ascendo system? That's really, really difficult. Now, the Perlisten systems maybe got a bit of a softer, more easygoing, maybe a little bit sweeter type of sound. I really like the Perlisten mid-range, the way that DPC solution works. It doesn't sound anything like how you think it will based on its looks, because essentially it looks like there's 3 tweeters, even though 2 of them are kind of very small mid-range drivers, and yet they create a very big, very clear, and very nice from a tone point of view, mid-range. That's what stands out to me about the R series in there from the Perlisten. Now, the Ascendo system is very much about liveliness, dynamics, intensity, and kind of shifting of energy. That's what that Ascendo system does. It's super impressive, amazingly well, actually, in that medium-sized room. The visceral impact from the movies, the energy, and also the spread, the immersion. So I'd say the Ascendo system sounds a little more diffuse, whereas the Perlisten system sounds a little more direct in terms of its delivery. Now, we're not talking a huge difference there. We are talking kind of a tangible, noticeable difference. So the spread of sound from the Ascendo system does make for a little more, maybe immersion, because of the way the coaxial drivers and that design of speaker kind of spreads its sound around the room, combined with that real energy, also combined with a really fantastic, very dynamic mid-range. So trying to sit here and talk about the differences between those two systems is really difficult, because they're both absolutely excellent. And all I could say is really you'd have to listen to those systems for yourself to try and decide which one you might prefer, but also just to, I think, appreciate how good they are. And then we come into this giant room, and I haven't got a huge amount of experience listening to home theatres of this scale and size, but again, neither system disappoint. In here, The Perlisten system's all S7 tower speakers, and then there's obviously surrounds and Atmos speakers too, and 4 of the dual 15. I'm not sure the name, but the dual 15 subwoofers, 2 at the front, 2 at the back. So it's quite a traditional home theatre setup in that environment, that type of design, but obviously trying to work in a huge room for a system of that size. And it filled this room with enormous sound, actually really visceral, really lively, really dynamic, really impactful at times sound. And I think the Perlisten system has that very familiar sound. You just put music on, you put content on, it has that familiar factor. Yeah, I've heard a system like this before, but this is just a giant version of that. So it's very easy to just sit and enjoy content with the Perlisten system. That's something that it does exceptionally well. And then it catches you out with a little bit of magic or a little bit of excitement or some big explosive dynamics. So that's super, super impressive. So yeah, I can't, it's not a bad word to say about the Perlisten system in this giant room. But then you step over to the Ascendo system, which is a bigger system. It has dual 18 subwoofers at the front and I think at the back, plus 32-inch subwoofers dual at the front. So an enormous amount of subwoofer and an enormous amount of bass. And then there's the Beryllium 15s at the front, 3 of those, plus quite small side surrounds and Atmos speakers. That was quite surprising that after hearing it, then learning that they was quite smaller speakers in the surrounds. I did not believe that, considering the size and scale of the sound that this system produces. So this Ascendo system in here delivered dynamics of home theatre that I've never really experienced before, because I've listened to very big home theatre systems before that deliver very, very loud sound, PA-like loud sound, but they haven't had a quality of sound that goes with them that would make me want to listen to more music or more one movie after the other. And we was listening extremely loud yesterday for this Ascendo system, obviously pushing it to its kind of towards its limit to see what it could do. And yet at the end of it, I didn't feel tired, I didn't feel fatigued. I could have sat in here for hours. I think we sat in here for about 3 hours yesterday listening to 100 decibel plus home theatre, and I could have sat in here all night listening to that system. So that's kind of on a whole other level of experience from a dynamics, from a vivid character type of point of view. But it's important to stress, we was watching movies for a good few hours and it's so intense because we're watching all the big hitting scenes in the movies, but we also listened to loads of multi-channel music. And when we had the multi-channel music on, the Ascendo system that had just been this big hard-hitting experience then had all this wonderful musical character and subtlety, big bass, drums. Wow, the attack on drums is really something. So again, this is a very, very hard thing to sit here and talk about these systems because they're absolutely outstanding. So really, it's like that's what a facility like this is for. If you're interested in building an absolutely killer home theatre system, regardless of the room size, if you're going to go the custom installation route, like putting all the speakers in the walls and subwoofers in the walls, I think you need to get that right first time, because you build the cinema around the equipment. So once the equipment's installed, you're not really going to want to pull that out. So if you was to install a system that you wasn't really happy with, that wasn't really delivering to the performance level, it's then a problem for you. I think it's different if you have box speakers, because you could change those box speakers really easily. But once everything's built in, once everything's built around your system and your screen and your actual physical surroundings, it's going to be very difficult for you to change. So that's where a facility like this really comes into its own, because you could experience these systems for yourself before you spend any money, so you can plan a whole home theatre around it and get it right the first time. Now, one thing that I definitely need to say, and that is a huge thank you to everybody who's kind of looked after me over the last 3+ days. So a huge thank you to all the team at Karma AV, a huge thank you to Jeffrey from Ascendo Audio, a thank you to Lars from Perlisten Audio for coming on camera and meeting with me, a huge thank you to Terry from Primare, obviously, for doing the same. So yeah, a huge thank you to everybody who's made my visit very, very, very special and memorable. Well, it would be a long time. I'll remember this actually probably for the rest of my life, this kind of amazing experience that I've had. So on that note, I hope everybody who's watched this video has enjoyed it too. I hope you found something useful in it. And if you'd like to experience these systems for yourself, of course they are open to the public, but through dealers. You would need to speak to dealers or your custom installer, whoever you're working with for your home theatre project. it's possible for you to come here and have a demo and listen to these systems for yourself. That's exactly what they are built for. So on that note, if you've enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the Pursuit of Perfect System YouTube channel if you'd like to see lots more reviews like this. Maybe leave a comment if you'd like to see me review some Perlisten speakers or some Ascendo speakers, obviously in my listening room / maybe home theatre again one day. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you all soon.